My contacts, but
glasses look great.
Is that right?
If you're comfortable in them,
yeah,
that's great. No worries.
Hides my bag, so
just gonna the sound. So
check. Hello.
Yeah, perfect. Just count to 10 for me.
1, 2, 3,
cool.
4. Okay.
We understand that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center. We don't know anything more than that. We don't know if it was a commercial aircraft. We don't know if it was a private aircraft.
Another one just hit the building. Wow. I was waiting at a table and I literally saw it seemed to be like a small plane.
American 11, are you trying to call?
Nobody move. Everything will be okay.
It's 8:54 right now. Stuart, can you tell me when this happened exactly?
I would have to say about 10 minutes ago.
I heard first an explosion.
Unconfirmed report that a plane has crashed into one of the towers there. We are efforting more information on this subject.
And all of a sudden, stuff just started falling, like bricks and paper and everything.
We can't see a second plane in the picture. There we see the explosion.
Probably 4 to 8 floors.
I don't know which tower it is.
I wondered whether I should start a film with a sound check and 1 minute of black screen. But I figured you've seen the pictures that accompany this story, painted by the incredible newscasters and contributors to CNN, CBS and the BBC. I was taught a lesson at the BBC that radio can sometimes paint a more powerful picture than television, that your imagination and your recall can be so much more powerful than the pictures before you. So before I play you some pictures, I wanted to start this film by respecting the fact you're intelligent enough to fill in some of the gaps of the previous 60 seconds during one of the most important and horrifying stories from the start of this century. And I also want to introduce you to the photojournalist Jason Florio, interviewed on my recent trip to the Gambia, 4,000 miles from where he stood on the morning of September the 11th, 2001.
Okay. So I was making a second journey into Afghanistan in 2001. In 2000, I'd travelled across Afghanistan to get a look at what the Taliban were up to, and my intentions were to head up into the north to be with Amir Shah Massoud, who was one of the big anti-Taliban commanders. Unfortunately, we couldn't make it in 2000, but a year later, the invitation was left open, and I was able to get up to see Massoud. Spent about a month up in the Panjshir Valley where he was holed up against the Taliban, and spent pretty much all of August up there with him and his sort of crew of fighters. And I returned to New York right at the beginning of September, about September the 5th, and I went to show all my pictures to the agency, and they said, yeah, it looks really great. No, I couldn't sell them. No one was interested in Afghan pictures, and I was just really disgruntled. Well, September the 11th happened, and I live in Greenwich Village, and obviously it's literally sort of walking distance to the Twin Towers. I was actually at a friend's house when I got the phone call from my agent and said, look, something's happened at the Twin Towers.
You didn't hear anything?
Actually, I should go back. I did actually hear something. I heard a plane go over, and I thought, that's really... Do you want me to go back? Or?
No.
Okay, so I did actually hear a plane go. I think, well, that was really low. Didn't really think too much about it. The phone rang, and it was my agent. He said, something's happened at the World Trade Center. I know you live close by. Do you think you can get down there? So I ran back to my apartment to get my gear. I had an Italian photographer friend staying there. He grabbed his stuff, and we started sort of going against the tide of people. We could see the towers were burning. And I ended up getting to the foot of the towers. My friend I was running with actually was wearing a pair of flip-flops. So he said, I'm going to go back and get properly equipped, kind of thing. So I said, okay, I'll meet you later. I'm sure it's just probably a small plane or something's happened. It's not going to be a big deal. I got to the foot of the towers, and I was with a bunch of policemen and some firemen, and we were just looking at these things burning, and I was sort of trying to compose pictures as best as possible. And the fireman said, there's bits of debris are starting to come down. I think we should pull back a little bit. And instead of pulling away north, we just basically turned to the right onto Vesey Street. And just as we took a few steps, I heard this massive explosion. And I looked around and thought, there must have been... By that point, we did know the big planes had hit. But we thought, maybe there was another bomb in the building, and that's what's exploded. Didn't realize a tower was coming down. Anyway, I started sprinting up the block. I put the camera behind me and just fired off about 4 very wobbly frames of dust and debris. And it felt like I was running in slow motion. It was the strangest sensation. And I realized when I went back later on that street has a small incline to it. So it did sort of feel I was sort of fighting this sort of movement. I got up to the corner, which was just maybe about 100 feet away, and there's a small entrance to the World Trade Center subway station. And I just literally went down the stairs because the dust had caught up with me by that point, and I just went tumbling down the stairs, ended up at the bottom of the stairs, and I had a Contax G2 camera with me and a Canon EOS, all film cameras obviously back then. And I realized the viewfinder had got smashed on my G2, and I was more concerned about the equipment. And then I realized I couldn't actually breathe because so much dust had gone in there. And I started to have a minor panic attack, I would say, because I was like, oh my God, I've got too close. I'm not going to get out of here. And then I heard some voices, and so I had this visualization that I would be able to get onto the tracks, and with these other people, we'd be able to walk up the subway tunnel. The people I was with were actually ended up being police officers, and they had kind of they had some sort of vests on. So I remember I sort of held on to them, and we sort of started to make our way through this tunnel, but we popped up on the other side of the street on Broadway, and it was just this insane scene. It was just, the air was filled with the dust. It was sort of almost yellowish in color.
Do you remember the smell?
At that point, I don't remember it, but it was something that stayed in the air in New York for a good 2 or 3 weeks. It was this very acrid, burning smell. And sometimes there's things that remind me of that, and I'm immediately taken back to that moment. But at that point, I remember just trying to breathe. I had all this dust in my throat, and there was an ambulance that was parked there. And I remember trying to open the door of the ambulance. I thought, well, I can get in there and get a bit of air. But some firemen caught up with us, and they took us to, there was a small deli. It's called the Stage Door Deli. It's just about a block away from the World Trade Center. And in there was a load of policemen, there were some firemen. Everyone was just completely covered in white dust. There was Ruth Frempson. She was a big New York Times photographer, and she actually won a Pulitzer Prize for the photograph that she took inside of the deli there. So I sort of stayed in there for, I think, about 20 minutes, just trying to drink water and kind of get all this dust out.
You were pouring water over the
heads, yeah. And it was just a sort of a very sort of strange scene. I don't remember the sound. It felt very quiet. I'm sure there were sirens and things, but it's almost I live that moment back through the pictures, and obviously the pictures are silent. And I think it got about 20 minutes into it, and I thought, you know what, I can't sit around in here. I need to get out and see what's going on. So I got out onto the street, and I saw a uniformed woman. I didn't think what department she was from, but she was with an officer who was down on the ground, I didn't know at that point, but he was really badly injured. He got his arm almost severed. And she was trying to help him. Other people were coming around. And I started taking pictures of this officer. And years later, we reconnected. We had two very different points of view of what happened at that moment. I was sure she said to me, "What are you doing? Have you got nothing else better to do?" And I said, "I'm just doing my effing job." She said I was actually really polite when we met years later, and I don't remember it that way, but I'm glad she remembers it that way. And then I decided to move on further down the block, and then again there was this massive rumble and explosion, and that was the second tower that was coming down. And actually, just moments before that, I'd called my apartment. I had another friend of mine staying there, and as I approached, it was one of the payphones. There was a guy standing at the payphone in all the dust, and he said, "I can't get through." And I said, "I can't get through on my mobile." And he said, "Oh, here's a quarter. Yeah, maybe you can get through. Call, what was that song? Here's a quarter. Call someone who cares."
And you did get through.
And so I got through to Joanna, who was at the apartment, and I said, "Hey, Joanna, it's Jason. I'm down here." And she said, "I said I'm fine." And next minute, that was when the second tower came down. I literally dropped the receiver and started sprinting. So she remembers being on the other end of the phone, and just hearing the silence. And at that point I got to Fulton Street subway station. I went down the stairs into that, and I ended up being with the ticket clerk in the office, and there was an FBI agent down there as well, and then we sort of were discussing what we were going to do at that point. You know, I was documenting it, but it was also happening to me at the same time as well, and to my friends. We were all, you know, obviously completely shell-shocked by what had happened. You know, every morning I'd come out, I live on Waverley and 6th Avenue, and I'd come out onto the street and the Twin Towers were right there, and often we'd sort of gauge the weather by whether you could see the tops of the towers or not. And you know, after that you get up, and it's such a shocking thing. It's almost incomprehensible to think that those buildings are not there.
Let's go, back up, come on.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's a place that we all had if you'd been to New York, even if you hadn't been to New York, yeah, there's such iconic structures, and whether they're structures, you see them as sort of something that's very arrogant, or you see them as something of beauty, or just as a landmark, or whatever, or a feat of you know, human endeavor. It's still just the audacity of what happened there is just so shocking. And even to this day, I mean, I get quite choked up about it still. You know, there's certain moments that happen, and it really, it penetrates me. Like the court officer who I mentioned, I reconnected with her a few years ago, and it was very emotional to sort of come back and retell. So, and her story was quite phenomenal because she had actually been in the South Tower when it collapsed. So just after I'd seen her, when I'd photographed her when she was helping this other officer, she had actually just got out of the rubble. Her commanding officer that she was with was killed next to her. They got thrown, and she miraculously survived without really any injuries. But her commanding officer was killed down there. So